Tonight's revenge story starts with a dentist staring at an x-ray and finding 4 separate fractures in my husband's jaw. For 8 months, everyone told me they were accidents. My husband told me they were accidents. His family told me they were accidents. They were all lying. What I uncovered next led to more than $238,000 in missing company money, 3 fake businesses, frozen bank accounts, a fraud investigation, and a search warrant that hit my brother-in-law's office just after opening on a Tuesday morning. By the time federal tax investigators got involved, the man everyone trusted was facing criminal charges and looking at the very real possibility of prison. My name is Maren Whitlock, and this is how one dental appointment exposed the secret that destroyed my husband's brother and changed our family forever. Chapter 1. I used to think the worst day of my marriage would involve a leaking roof, a failed furnace in January, or maybe one of those terrifying letters from the IRS that make your stomach drop before you even open the envelope. I was wrong. The day that changed everything started with a cracked tooth. My husband, Declan Whitlock, bit into a walnut hidden inside a batch of homemade granola and managed to fracture a molar. That was exactly the sort of thing Declan would do. He could spend 12 hours rebuilding a luxury kitchen with perfect precision, but somehow injure himself eating breakfast. By 10 that morning, we were sitting in the office of Dr. Elise Voss in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. While Declan was in the exam chair, I sat in the corner with my laptop open, reviewing payroll reports for the transportation company where I worked. Numbers had always made sense to me. People were harder. A driver clocked 47 hours but was paid for 45. I noticed. A fuel reimbursement was off by $12. I noticed. A duplicate invoice slipped into an accounting folder. I noticed. My entire career depended on catching things that did not belong. Which is why what happened next still bothers me, because for 8 months, something had been wrong inside my own house, and I never saw it. Dr. Voss studied Declan's initial scan longer than expected. Then she requested another image, a panoramic scan. I remember looking up from my screen, because that seemed excessive for a cracked tooth. The technician left with Declan. A few minutes later, they returned. Dr. Voss reviewed the new images. Her expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough. The kind of change you see when someone opens an email they wish they had never received. She excused herself, came back carrying a tablet, then looked directly at me. "Could I speak with you privately for a moment?" The hallway outside smelled faintly of disinfectant and vanilla air freshener. Dr. Voss turned the tablet toward me. I am not a dentist. I barely understand medical imaging, but even I could tell the white lines crossing the jaw were not supposed to be there. She pointed carefully. 1 fracture here, another here, another lower down, then the newest injury. 4 total. 4 separate fractures, different stages of healing, different dates, different incidents. I stared at the screen. My brain refused to process the information. "There has to be some mistake," I said. Dr. Voss shook her head gently. "I reviewed these twice. These injuries occurred over an extended period of time. This pattern is not consistent with normal construction accidents." My mouth went dry. Construction accidents. That was exactly how Declan had explained every injury. March, he fell from a ladder. June, a cabinet door hit him. September, he slipped carrying materials. November, the walnut. 4 explanations, 4 separate stories, 4 fractures, all on the same side of his jaw. Dr. Voss lowered her voice. "I am documenting everything thoroughly. If your family needs medical records or legal documentation later, we will have them available." Legal documentation. The phrase hit harder than the medical diagnosis, because legal documentation implied something else. Someone had done this. Someone had hurt my husband repeatedly, and someone convinced him not to tell me. When I walked back into the exam room, Declan was sitting exactly where I had left him. His hands rested on his knees. His shoulders were tense. His eyes stayed fixed on the floor. He never asked what Dr. Voss said, never asked what she showed me, never looked confused. That was the moment fear replaced shock. because innocent people ask questions. Declan already knew the answers. The drive home felt endless. Neither of us spoke. The silence stretched mile after mile. Outside the windows, traffic moved normally. People bought groceries, filled gas tanks, walked dogs. Entire lives continued as usual. Meanwhile, my marriage was quietly falling apart inside a pickup truck. I kept replaying the previous months. Small things surfaced from memory. Declan waking up at 3 in the morning, long periods staring into space, sudden irritation whenever his phone rang, conversations that stopped when I entered the room, financial stress that never quite made sense. Our remodeling company stayed busy. Work kept coming, customers seemed happy, yet money felt tighter every month. We postponed replacing tires, delayed home repairs, skipped vacations. At the time, I blamed inflation. Now I wasn't so sure. One name appeared again and again in my thoughts. Gideon, Declan's older brother, his business partner, the man who seemed capable of turning every family gathering into a conversation about himself. Every time Gideon called, Declan became tense. I had noticed it, I just never understood why. About 15 minutes later, I pulled into a parking lot of a convenience store. I parked, turned off the engine, and finally looked at my husband. "Tell me the truth." Declan stared through the windshield. His jaw tightened. Nothing happened. I waited. Another minute passed, then another. "I'm not leaving until you tell me what's going on," I said. His eyes closed. For a second, he looked exhausted. Not physically exhausted, the kind of exhaustion that comes from carrying a secret too long. "You wouldn't understand," he whispered. "Try me." He swallowed hard, then finally looked at me. The shame in his expression hurt more than the answer. "Gideon." I thought I misheard him. "Your brother?" He nodded. The world seemed to tilt slightly. Not a stranger, not a customer, not someone from a bar fight. His own brother, the man he worked beside every day, the man their mother constantly praised, the man everyone trusted. I waited for an explanation that would somehow make sense. None came. Instead, Declan stared down at his hands and said something even worse. "You think this started with the violence." His voice was barely audible. It didn't. This started because of money. Then he took a long breath and began telling me the story he had hidden for 8 months. At first, I thought Gideon had stolen a few $1,000s. The kind of money a desperate business owner might quietly move around and then replace before anyone noticed. I was wrong about that too. Declan stared through the windshield while the parking lot lights reflected across the glass. His voice sounded distant, like he was describing someone else's life instead of his own. "It started in February of last year. Just little things at first." "What kind of things?" "Invoices." "For what?" "Subcontractors." I frowned. We used subcontractors all the time. Electricians, plumbers, drywall crews. Nothing unusual about that. "Then why did it bother you?" "Because I'd never heard of them." That answer landed harder than I expected. Whitlock Residential Renovations was not some giant corporation with hundreds of vendors. It was a family business. Declan knew every supplier, every foreman, every crew leader, every electrician who had ever worked one of their projects. If a company name appeared on an invoice and he didn't recognize it, something was wrong. He continued quietly. The first invoice was less than $3,000. Then another showed up. Then another. Different projects, different dates, same pattern. I asked Gideon about them. And? He said I was focusing on the wrong things. I could already hear the tone. Dismissive, patronizing, the tone of someone used to getting his way. Declan rubbed his hands together. I let it go for a while. Then I started checking job files myself. That's when I realized the numbers didn't match the work being completed. The payment amounts kept growing. The projects stayed the same. The discrepancy became impossible to ignore. "What happened when you confronted him?" For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he gave a humorless laugh. "You ever have a moment where someone finally shows you who they are?" I nodded. That was mine. The memory clearly disgusted him. He explained how he had waited until the employees left one evening. The warehouse was nearly empty, only him and Gideon remained. He carried several invoices into Gideon's office, placed them on the desk, asked a simple question: who are these companies? Gideon looked at the paperwork, looked at him, then leaned back in his chair. No panic, no denial, no explanation, just silence. Finally, Declan asked again, who are they? According to Declan, he smiled, not because something was funny, because he had decided he no longer needed to pretend. Then what? Declan touched the side of his jaw unconsciously. Then he hit me. I stared at him. He wasn't angry? No. Not yelling? No. He just got up and punched me. The image made my stomach twist. Not a fight, not an argument that spiraled out of control, a calculated decision, one clean act of violence. Declan swallowed. I hit the floor. He stood over me and told me to stop digging. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. Nobody saw? Nobody. And afterwards? He told me something I couldn't stop thinking about for months. I waited. Your name is on everything too. I felt a chill. Declan continued. He reminded me I was listed on company documents, tax filings, contracts, business registrations, vendor agreements, everything. Then he said if investigators ever showed up and started asking questions, they wouldn't know who moved the money. They'd see both our names. I understood immediately. It was not a physical threat anymore. It was a legal one. What did you do? I talked to a lawyer. That surprised me. You did? A guy I knew years ago. Nothing formal, just a conversation. And? His jaw tightened. He said Gideon wasn't wrong. The answer clearly haunted him. The lawyer explained that walking away would not erase responsibility attached to past transactions. Removing himself from the company would not automatically protect him. If fraud existed inside the business, investigators would still examine everyone connected to it. Declan looked exhausted remembering it. I left that meeting feeling trapped. The word lingered in the air. Trapped. Not guilty, not complicit, trapped. Over the next 8 months, his life slowly became smaller. Every time he questioned another payment, Gideon responded. Sometimes it was intimidation, sometimes threats, sometimes violence, sometimes nothing more than a reminder that he controlled the records. The uncertainty became its own weapon. He never knew what version of Gideon would appear, the charming businessman, the protective older brother, or the man who had broken his jaw. I thought about the previous year, all the moments that finally made sense, the restless nights, the tension, the silence, the financial anxiety. Our checking account seemed permanently under pressure. We postponed replacing my aging SUV tires, delayed fixing the water-damaged trim near the garage, skipped weekend trips, questioned every purchase over $100. Meanwhile, Gideon seemed to be thriving. New clothes, expensive dinners, weekend golf outings, generous gifts. I remembered Christmas dinner. Lorraine Whitlock spent nearly 20 minutes praising him. Gideon takes such good care of family. Gideon always knows how to succeed. Gideon works harder than anyone. At the time, I rolled my eyes. Now, I felt something darker. Anger. A few days after learning the truth, I called Lorraine myself. I hoped she would help. I honestly believed a mother would want to know her son had been assaulted repeatedly. Instead, she defended him before I finished the story. There has to be some misunderstanding. There isn't. Gideon would never do that. You weren't there. Neither were you. Silence. Then came the part that hurt most. Declan has always been sensitive. I almost hung up. Sensitive? 4 fractures, 8 months of fear, financial manipulation, and somehow her concerns centered on Gideon's reputation. You think your son invented this? I think families say things when they're upset. The conversation ended badly. I sat at our kitchen table afterwards, staring at nothing. Then another realization struck me. The vehicle Lorraine drove, the expensive restaurant lunches she constantly posted online, the little surprises Gideon paid for, the home repairs, the gifts, the generosity she bragged about. What if none of it had actually come from Gideon? What if every compliment she gave him had been purchased using funds stolen from the business Declan helped build? The thought made me physically sick. Back in the parking lot, Declan finally looked at me again. How much do you think he took? Around 210,000. The number was staggering, enough to change lives, enough to destroy them too. But something about his answer bothered me. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was years spent hunting discrepancies hidden inside spreadsheets. Maybe it was simply the certainty that people rarely stop once they discover a successful scheme. I stared ahead through the windshield, then quietly asked the question forming in my mind. What if that's not the real number? Declan frowned. What do you mean? I looked at him, and for the first time since leaving the dentist office, I felt something stronger than fear, suspicion. I think we're only seeing part of it. Chapter 3. The next evening, after dinner dishes sat untouched in the sink, I opened my laptop and started looking for answers. Declan gave me access to everything he legally could, not because he wanted me involved, because he was out of excuses, out of places to hide, out of ways to carry the weight alone. For 8 months, he had been trying to solve the problem himself. 8 months later, we were sitting at our kitchen table, hunting through records together. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. Declan leaned back in his chair. You don't have to do this tonight. Yes, I do. Marin, if somebody stole nearly $250,000 from a company with your name on it, then I'm doing this tonight. He looked exhausted. I looked determined. The second one won. I started with invoices, then payment schedules, then project reports, then vendor records. Hours passed. Coffee turned cold. Midnight came and went. Slowly, a pattern emerged. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Then I stopped doubting myself. Certain company names kept appearing, not constantly, strategically, almost as if someone understood exactly how much fraud could be hidden before people started asking questions. I wrote 3 names on a yellow legal pad: Keystone Ridge Drywall, North Point Plumbing Solutions, Elk Valley Electrical. I turned the pad toward Declan. Do these companies exist? I've never worked with them. Ever? No. I checked another project, then another, then another. The same names appeared again, not enough to dominate the books, just enough to drain money over time. The longer I looked, the worse it became. The invoices followed identical formatting, identical fonts, identical spacing. Even the billing language sounded suspiciously similar. Different businesses rarely write exactly the same way. These did. I opened Pennsylvania business registration records. My eyes burned from staring at the screen. The clock showed 1:30 in the morning. Then I found something interesting. Every registration pointed toward the same commercial mailbox location. Not neighboring addresses, not nearby offices, the exact same mailbox facility. I sat up straighter. No way. Declan looked over. What? They all use the same address. What does that mean? It means either the most coincidental contractors in Pennsylvania somehow rent the same mailbox. I stopped. He finished the sentence. Or they're fake. Neither of us slept much that night. The following evening, I dug deeper. That was when I found the registered owner. My stomach dropped, not because I recognized the business name, because I recognized hers. Betrayal Hart. I stared at the screen, then checked again. Same result, same registration, same name. Declan looked confused. What is it? Betrayal. His face immediately changed. Gideon's girlfriend, the woman who brought homemade desserts to family cookouts, the woman who laughed at all of Gideon's jokes, the woman Lorraine adored. I leaned back, trying to understand what I was seeing. Was Betrayal helping him? Did she know? Had she signed paperwork intentionally, or had Gideon convinced her she was helping with something legitimate? The answer mattered. A willing accomplice and an unwitting participant were 2 very different things. Unfortunately, the records couldn't tell me which one she was. For several days, I became obsessed. I went to work, came home, made dinner, opened my laptop, repeated the cycle. The more information I reviewed, the uglier everything looked. Payment dates clustered around identical periods. Certain invoices appeared immediately before large withdrawals. Several expenses were attached to jobs that never required subcontractors at all. Every discovery led to another. Every answer created two new questions. One Thursday night, I finally totaled everything. Not what Declan estimated, not what he feared, the real number. I entered the final amount into a spreadsheet, then stared at it. $238,400. For several seconds, I thought I made a mistake. I recalculated. Same result. Checked again. Same result. Declan watched from across the table. How bad? I turned the screen toward him. His expression collapsed. That's impossible. It isn't. We would have noticed. We should have. Silence filled the room. $238,000, money that should have paid employees, purchased equipment, protected the business, supported our future. Gone. And somehow Gideon had convinced everyone around him that he was the responsible brother, the successful brother, the generous son. After that night, something changed. Not in the records, in Gideon. At first, the signs were subtle. A random visit, an unexpected phone call, questions that seemed harmless until you thought about them later. Then they became harder to ignore. One Sunday afternoon, he appeared at our house without warning, claimed he was in the neighborhood. He wasn't. Nobody casually drove 40 minutes just to say hello, especially not Gideon. He sat in our living room drinking coffee, talking about football, talking about weather, talking about absolutely nothing. And all the while, he watched Declan, studied him, measured every reaction, every pause, every glance, almost like he was looking for evidence. An hour passed, then another. Finally, he stood, smiled, patted Declan's shoulder, and left. The second the front door closed, I looked at my husband. He knows something. Declan nodded. I think so too. What if he doesn't believe that? Neither of us answered, because we both knew the truth. People who lie for a living eventually assume everyone else does too. The pressure kept building. Every conversation felt dangerous. Every family interaction carried tension underneath it. Meanwhile, I continued searching. One night, I focused entirely on company email archives. Thousands of messages, vendor correspondence, scheduling updates, invoices, approvals. Buried among them were payment confirmations, dozens of them. I opened one, then another, then another. A cold feeling settled in my chest. Each transaction connected back to the same user credentials, the same approval pathway, the same account activity. Gideon. Not assumptions, not suspicions, not theories. Evidence, actual evidence. My pulse raced. I opened additional records, cross-referenced dates, matched payment amounts, compared timestamps. Everything aligned. Every road led back to him. For the first time since leaving Dr. Voss's office, I felt certainty. Not hope, not instinct, certainty. I finally had something real, something a lawyer could use, something that existed outside family arguments and personal accusations. Proof. I closed the laptop slowly. Across the room, Declan watched me. Did you find it? I nodded. Yes. His voice barely moved above a whisper. And? I looked toward the dark window above the sink, toward our reflection staring back from the glass. Then I answered honestly. I think we finally have what we need. But somewhere beyond our house, beyond the spreadsheets and records and hidden transactions, another realization was beginning to take shape. Because while I had spent weeks uncovering Gideon's secrets, Gideon himself had started sensing that something around him was changing. And men who survive by controlling every situation rarely stay calm when control begins to slip. That realization turned out to be more valuable than any spreadsheet I had uncovered, because evidence alone does not destroy people like Gideon. Pressure does. The following Monday, I called Owen Mercer. His office sat inside a restored brick building in downtown Harrisburg, 3 floors above a coffee shop that smelled permanently of roasted beans and cinnamon. Everything about the place felt understated. No marble floors, no dramatic conference room, just shelves full of case files, and a man whose reputation existed because people trusted him with ugly situations. He listened more than he talked. That immediately made me like him. Declan and I spent nearly 2 hours walking him through everything: the injuries, the invoices, the vendor records, the company registrations, the payment confirmations, the mailbox address, Brielle Hart, every piece, every document, every date. Owen rarely interrupted. Occasionally, he wrote notes. Occasionally, he asked a question. Nothing more. Finally, he leaned back. "You've done impressive work." Neither of us smiled. Compliments felt irrelevant. "What happens now?" I asked. He folded his hands together. "Now we do this correctly." Declan frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means we don't run to the police station carrying a cardboard box full of paperwork." I blinked. "People actually do that?" "More than you'd think." For the first time that morning, he almost smiled. Then his expression became serious again. "If fraud occurred, we need a clear chain of evidence. We need documentation. We need timelines. We need everything organized." He pointed toward the folders stacked across his desk. "The good news is, you're already halfway there." I felt relief begin to surface. For the first time since Dr. Voss showed me those scans, someone with actual legal experience had looked at the facts and taken them seriously. Not dismissed them, not minimized them, not defended Gideon. Taken them seriously. Owen spent another hour explaining process. Documentation first, legal review second, formal reporting after that. Every step mattered. Every mistake could create problems later. When we finally left his office, I felt something unfamiliar. Hope. Not certainty, not victory, just hope. The feeling lasted exactly 3 days. Then Lorraine called. At first, I considered letting the call go to voicemail. Instead, I answered. "Hi, Lorraine." Her voice sounded unusually tense. "How are things?" The question immediately raised alarms. She never started conversations that way. "Fine." A pause. Then another. Finally, she said it. "Gideon mentioned you've been asking questions." My stomach tightened. There it was, the warning, the fishing expedition, the attempt to gather information without appearing obvious. I chose my words carefully. "What kind of questions?" "Oh, you know." No, I didn't know, and neither did she, because she was guessing, trying to discover how much I understood, trying to help her favorite son. The realization hurt less than it used to. By then, I expected it. We ended the conversation a few minutes later. Nothing explosive, nothing dramatic, yet the damage had already been done. Because somewhere after hanging up, Lorraine almost certainly called Gideon, and Gideon panicked. The changes appeared immediately. Employees later mentioned he spent unusual amounts of time alone in his office. Several accounting files disappeared from shared folders. Old backups suddenly vanished. Records that had existed for months could no longer be found. One afternoon, Declan received a call from a project manager. "You know Gideon has been pulling archived files all week." Declan looked at me across the kitchen. I already knew what that meant. He was cleaning house. Or trying to. The problem was that people who panic rarely think clearly. Every decision becomes reactionary. Every reaction leaves traces. A week later, another development arrived. This one from Owen. His name appeared on my phone just after lunch. I answered immediately. "Please tell me you have good news." "I might." My pulse quickened. What happened? There was movement. What kind of movement? An account connected to one of the entities attempted a substantial transfer. I sat upright. He tried moving money? Looks that way. The silence stretched. Then Owen continued. The transfer failed. For several seconds, I simply stared at my desk. Failed. The word sounded beautiful, not because of the money, because of what it meant. Someone had become frightened enough to act. Someone was scrambling. Someone knew trouble was coming. Later that evening, Owen explained more details during a conference call. The account had already been flagged, protective actions were underway, financial institutions had received notice, the transaction never completed. Declan listened quietly, then asked the obvious question. So Gideon knows? He knows something. What exactly? Owen sighed. He knows he has a problem. He just doesn't know where it's coming from. That distinction mattered a lot, because uncertainty is terrifying. If Gideon knew who exposed him, he could focus his attention. Instead, he faced dozens of possibilities. Declan, Brielle, employees, former employees, accountants, vendors, anyone, everyone. Not me. The irony almost made me laugh. I remained invisible. The payroll coordinator nobody considered dangerous, the wife who supposedly knew nothing about construction, the woman everyone underestimated, including Gideon, especially Gideon. Over the next several days, his paranoia grew. According to employees, he spent unusual amounts of time alone in his office. Several accounting files disappeared from shared folders. Old backups suddenly vanished. Records that had existed for months could no longer be found. One afternoon, Declan received a call from a project manager. "You know Gideon has been pulling archived files all week." Declan looked at me across the kitchen. I already knew what that meant. He was cleaning house, or trying to. The problem was that people who panic rarely think clearly. Every decision becomes reactionary. Every reaction leaves traces. A week later, another development arrived. This one from Owen. His name appeared on my phone just after lunch. I answered immediately. "Please tell me you have good news." "I might." My pulse quickened. What happened? There was movement. What kind of movement? An account connected to one of the entities attempted a substantial transfer. I sat upright. He tried moving money? Looks that way. The silence stretched. Then Owen continued. The transfer failed. For several seconds, I simply stared at my desk. Failed. The word sounded beautiful, not because of the money, because of what it meant. Someone had become frightened enough to act. Someone was scrambling. Someone knew trouble was coming. Later that evening, Owen explained more details during a conference call. The account had already been flagged. Protective actions were underway. Financial institutions had received notice. The transaction never completed. Declan listened quietly, then asked the obvious question. So Gideon knows? He knows something. What exactly? Owen sighed. He knows he has a problem. He just doesn't know where it's coming from. That distinction mattered a lot, because uncertainty is terrifying. If Gideon knew who exposed him, he could focus his attention. Instead, he faced dozens of possibilities. Declan, Brielle, employees, former employees, accountants, vendors, anyone, everyone. Not me. The irony almost made me laugh. I remained invisible. The payroll coordinator nobody considered dangerous, the wife who supposedly knew nothing about construction, the woman everyone underestimated, including Gideon. Over the next several days, his paranoia grew. According to employees, he spent unusual amounts of time alone in his office. Several accounting files disappeared from shared folders. Old backups suddenly vanished. Records that had existed for months could no longer be found. One afternoon, Declan received a call from a project manager. "You know Gideon has been pulling archived files all week." Declan looked at me across the kitchen. I already knew what that meant. He was cleaning house, or trying to. The problem was that people who panic rarely think clearly. Every decision becomes reactionary. Every reaction leaves traces. A week later, another development arrived. This one from Owen. His name appeared on my phone just after lunch. I answered immediately. "Please tell me you have good news." "I might." My pulse quickened. What happened? There was movement. What kind of movement? An account connected to one of the entities attempted a substantial transfer. I sat upright. He tried moving money? Looks that way. The silence stretched. Then Owen continued. The transfer failed. For several seconds, I simply stared at my desk. Failed. The word sounded beautiful, not because of the money, because of what it meant. Someone had become frightened enough to act. Someone was scrambling. Someone knew trouble was coming. Later that evening, Owen explained more details during a conference call. The account had already been flagged. Protective actions were underway. Financial institutions had received notice. The transaction never completed. Declan listened quietly, then asked the obvious question. So Gideon knows? He knows something. What exactly? Owen sighed. He knows he has a problem. He just doesn't know where it's coming from. That distinction mattered a lot, because uncertainty is terrifying. If Gideon knew who exposed him, he could focus his attention. Instead, he faced dozens of possibilities. Chapter 5. The following Tuesday started like every other workday Gideon had ever lived through. That was the cruel beauty of it. The world never announces the moment everything is about to collapse. People still pour coffee, traffic lights still change, phones still ring, and men who believe they are untouchable still walk into their offices expecting another ordinary morning. I was sitting at my desk when Owen's name appeared on my phone. I answered immediately. "It's happening." That was all he said. My heart began pounding. Declan looked up from across the room. I didn't have to explain. He already knew. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. After 8 months of fear, secrets, lies, and uncertainty, the moment had finally arrived. The investigators entered Whitlock residential renovations shortly after opening. According to employees who witnessed it, the atmosphere changed instantly. Conversations stopped, phones went silent, every eye followed the group moving through the building. Documents were presented, questions were asked. Authority replaced confusion within seconds. Computers were secured, hard drives collected, financial records boxed, contracts removed, archived files cataloged. Everything happened calmly, professionally, methodically, exactly the way Owen said it would. No dramatic shouting, no movie scene chaos, just procedure, the kind that terrifies guilty people. Around noon, Gideon called Declan. His voice sounded different, not confident, not arrogant, scared. For the first time in years, scared. "What did you do?" Declan looked at me before answering. "I don't know what you're talking about. Don't play games with me." "I'm not." Another pause. Then Gideon lowered his voice. "You talked to somebody." Declan remained calm. "I should have done that a long time ago." The line went silent, then disconnected. That evening, another call came, this time from Owen. "They've interviewed Betrayal." I sat upright. "And?" "She's cooperating." For several seconds, I closed my eyes. Not because I was celebrating, because I finally understood what had happened. Betrayal had never been the mastermind. She had never been the architect. She was the cover, the shield, the convenient name placed on paperwork while someone else moved money behind the scenes. Later, we learned much more. Investigators showed her the records, the registrations, the transactions, the account histories, the payment trails. For the first time, she saw everything together. Every lie, every hidden transfer, every fraudulent company. The illusion collapsed, and when it did, she told the truth. Not part of it, all of it. The details strengthened the case immediately. By Thursday afternoon, investigators possessed evidence from multiple directions: financial records, digital records, witness testimony, business documentation, medical documentation, and the one thing Gideon could never explain away: intent. The arrest happened the next morning. I wasn't there, but I remember exactly where I was when the call came, standing in my kitchen, holding a mug that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. Declan answered first, listened, said almost nothing, then ended the call. Neither of us moved. Finally, I asked, "Was it done?" He nodded. "Yeah." That single word carried 8 months of pain, 8 months of silence, 8 months of fear. The charges were exactly what investigators expected: fraud, theft by deception, forgery. Assault. The assault charges mattered more than I expected because they proved something important. This was never only about money, it was also about control, about intimidation, about violence used to protect a secret. The medical evidence helped establish that timeline. Dr. Elise Voss's records, the x-rays, the documented injuries, the progression of healing, everything matched. Everything supported Declan's account. Every fracture that once existed only as a painful memory had become evidence. I thought the story was over then. I was wrong one final time. Several weeks later, digital forensic specialists completed their examination of the devices seized during the search. Deleted files were recovered, archived records restored, hidden folders uncovered. What investigators discovered made the original fraud scheme look small. There were two sets of tax records, one legitimate, one manipulated, one accurate, one designed to conceal income. The difference between them was staggering. More than $370,000 in revenue had never been properly reported. When Owen explained it to us, even he sounded impressed by the scale of the deception. The information was forwarded to federal authorities. Soon afterward, IRS criminal investigation became involved. The situation expanded beyond local fraud allegations, beyond business theft, beyond family conflict. The consequences kept growing, exactly the way Gideon's lies had grown, one decision leading to another, one secret requiring 3 more cover-ups, one crime demanding 5 additional cover-ups, until the entire structure finally collapsed under its own weight. The financial accounts remained frozen, the fraudulent companies were dismantled, the evidence continued accumulating. Former allies disappeared. People stopped returning calls. The reputation Gideon spent years building vanished remarkably fast. Success built on deception rarely survives exposure. Lorraine struggled the most. For months, she searched for alternative explanations, misunderstandings, mistakes, conspiracies, anything except reality. Then reality arrived anyway, slowly, relentlessly. The son she defended, the son she trusted, the son she praised endlessly, had betrayed his own family, had stolen from his own business, had assaulted his own brother. Eventually, she stopped making excuses, not because someone convinced her, because the evidence became impossible to deny. Some lessons arrived too late. That one certainly did. As for Declan, I watched something remarkable happen. The fear disappeared, not overnight, not magically, but steadily. He slept again, laughed again, made plans again. The tension that had lived permanently behind his eyes began fading. He focused on rebuilding the company, cleaning records, correcting problems, repairing relationships with clients, restoring trust. Real work, honest work, the kind he always preferred. Several months after everything ended, I returned to Dr. Elise Voss's office, not because anything was wrong. For the first time in a long time, nothing was wrong. I was simply overdue for my own appointment. While sitting in the examination chair, I found myself staring at the monitor mounted on the wall, thinking about a different image, a different patient, a different day. 1 X-ray, 4 fractures, a secret buried beneath 8 months of fear. The memory felt strangely distant, almost unreal, yet it had changed everything. It exposed the truth, protected my husband, destroyed a lie, and ultimately delivered justice. Gideon spent years believing power came from money, from influence, from intimidation, from control. In the end, none of those things defeated him. The numbers did. The records he manipulated, the transactions he concealed, the evidence he tried to erase. Those were the things that finally brought him down. And sometimes I still wonder what would have happened if I had ignored that first strange feeling in the dentist's office, if I had accepted another explanation, if I had looked away. So I'd love to know your thoughts. If you were in my position, would you have confronted Gideon immediately, or would you have quietly gathered evidence the way I did? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you in the next story.